Hello, I'm Marcus Lowth, and welcome to the Anomaly Project, the show that looks into all aspects of the paranormal and anomalous world. Now, with me as he is every week is the one and only Steve Mera. Now, Steve, in this show tonight, it's going to be a bit of a peek behind the White House walls, in part. I'm looking forward to this.
It always is interesting because there's a huge amount of history, and there is a lot of rumors about presidents having certain experiences and things. So it'd be really good to peek behind that veil a little bit and find out a little bit more, for sure.
Absolutely. So, joining us tonight is researcher and author of several books, who's also appeared on radio and television shows, Mr. Paul Blake Smith. So, Paul, thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. I'm a little jealous of Steve Mera's book collection. Does he live in a library?
Yeah.
Wow.
Lots of stuff to get through there. Lots of stuff to get through here. Paul, let's just delve into it. I mean, you've written multiple books about various aspects of the UFO world, but written, excuse me, a couple based on the president's experience. So, what kind of drew you towards that particular aspect of ufology?
I remember hearing about the Eisenhower allegation back in the early 1980s. I'm giving away my age, but it became a bit of a sensation when it was written up in the National Enquirer. And you may say, well, that's a tabloid of no great repute. But in those days, they're the only ones in America that would print UFO stories. And I contacted the author of the story a few years ago, and he says, I stand by everything in that story. We researched it very well. We even talked to the famous J. Allen Hynek, who said he was familiar with the Eisenhower story. Hynek was the advisor to Steven Spielberg on Close Encounters, where they had this air base isolated out west in the American desert Southwest. Aliens came down and they met with Air Force officials. And that's essentially the Eisenhower story. Spielberg left out the president being there. He probably didn't want to get shut down, for revealing too much at that time. That was like 1976, 77. So I think Spielberg knows a lot more than he's saying. And he did debut his E.T. movie in the White House for President Reagan. And Spielberg, after many years of silence, said, Reagan said to me, you don't know how true that story is, that he said it seriously. So
Yeah.
Reagan knew, and I think other presidents know. Certainly Eisenhower found out. I think he was curious. And from what I'm told, it was set up almost before he took office in January of 53, that supposedly there was this high frequency radio contact with another race, and that they were trying to set up a meeting. They felt it was extremely important. And when you hear the story, you realize, yeah, for aliens and humans, it was pretty important. So they allegedly, and I believe it's true, negotiated out west in the desert of Mojave in the California area outside of Los Angeles, Edwards Air Force Base. And Eisenhower just happened to go on a golf trip, even though he goes on lots of them. He just had to fly 2,700 miles out to the Pacific West Coast in America, and just happened to be around when the call came in on February 19th, 1954. And apparently there were advisors at the airport, or the airfield, I guess I should call it, Edwards Air Base, and they said it's a go. They're friendly and they're unarmed. We suggest you come on out here. And there was an American congressman named Henry McElroy who confirmed this story. He was in office and he said, I've seen the documents on this. And Eisenhower was asked if he wanted to go, and he was no shrinking violet. And Eisenhower said yes, and he did go. And he met with these beings that were humanoids, very much like human beings, and they spoke our language and knew of our customs, and they expressed their deep concern for our atomic bomb testing program. We were setting off nuclear contamination into the atmosphere, into the water, into the ground. We were testing them all over the place recklessly, like little boys playing with matches and gasoline, frankly. And in those days, it was astonishing how we were producing them in mass and testing them just helter skelter, and so were the Soviets, I might add. So they were deeply concerned that we are sending pollutants, nuclear contamination, even into outer space. So that was a pretty good reason to sit down and try to talk to the head man. Take us to your leader. Well, they did, and they were so friendly and nice that Eisenhower made sure not to touch them, according to an eyewitness at the encounter, a U.S. Air Force test pilot who spoke out around 1981 or 82. And he said Eisenhower kept himself surrounded by 6 bodyguards at all times. And he said, I'm not going to disarm unilaterally. I want to see other nations, stop their nuclear production and nuclear bomb testing. So the aliens wanted to impress him. And they did 2 things. They put on 2 free shows. First, an air show, and they showed up in 5 different ships. 3 were circular, 2 were elongated, and they put on an air show in the sky at night. This would have been like 9 or 10 o'clock at night over Edwards Air Base, where the base was basically cleared for security reasons. And it was pretty dazzling. They could fly back and forth and flit here and there and stop on a dime and come down and land. And that impressed everyone. But what they did next, Eisenhower was astonished and deeply concerned that I think his face turned kind of red with embarrassment. Would you like to know what they did?
Oh,
yeah, sure.
It was really the last straw for Eisenhower, who told him, after this event, you're going to have to go. Our world is not ready for you yet. What they were offering to do was create an education program for the people of Earth. And one of the things they could show they could do was to cloak themselves into invisibility, like here 1 second, gone the next. And the test pilot said they eventually reappeared. We could hear them. We knew they were still there, and they made themselves invisible to the human naked eye. They were able to somehow cloak themselves. And now, these days, we are working on cloaking technology, which was probably pretty far out for 1954. Eisenhower, he was really ruffled by this and said, we can't have this. You're going to have to go. This is, over our heads. He said, literally, we're afraid you're going to touch off a mass panic. Probably disrupt the stock market, send the national, if not international economy falling if you make yourselves known here. So apparently he came to an agreement with these human-like beings to not show yourself overtly, don't set off a panic, don't land in a city and start talking to people. And if you have to show up, we'll give you an air base in the Nevada desert. And this is all according to a leaked document from January 1989 for the incoming George H.W. Bush administration. It was leaked in 2017, and I was given permission to print it in the back of my book, The Eisenhower Encounter. And so it checks out the story, said Eisenhower did go. And so it's just an astonishing, exciting story that a U.S. president met with alien beings, even though they were very human-like. The test pilot said later, they were somewhat misshapen by our standards. I'm thinking maybe they had wider nostrils or a bigger chest for breathing their atmosphere on their home planet, something like that. So the story pretty much holds together. Supposedly, Eisenhower even set up film cameras and recorded the event. And I'm thinking for a couple of reasons, for security reasons, in case something goes wrong, we've got a record of, what they did to us. And also, if it went really well, I know this is astonishing, but he was a politician and he wanted to get reelected. Could he come forward and say, look who landed and wanted to talk to me, and then blow the lid off the whole thing and get reelected? Well, he was reelected anyway. And there is a letter from a gentleman named Gerald Light, who said, I visited Edwards Air Force Base in early April, and there were rumors there that Eisenhower had been here in February on his golf vacation, and that he had met with these creatures, and that an official announcement was being put off until the month of May, and that never happened, that there was tremendous pressure on Eisenhower not really to reveal this, and he gave in to that pressure and kept his mouth shut.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I know some little bits about the case, and of course, I know that there's some confusion sometimes between the Holloman Air Force Base incident and the Edwards Air Force Base incident. But the Paul, you might be able to shed a bit of light on this. There was a documentary that came out in the 70s. I think it was called UFO. It Has Begun. I think it had 2 titles actually, but there was a scene in that documentary where it was only seconds of a UFO coming down towards the tarmac. It was also said that maybe another 2 were up there monitoring, but it was supposed to be at least quite a lengthy piece of footage, which was taken out at the last minute. And I think it was the only documentary. It was basically put forward by the United States Air Force. Am I right by saying that?
That is quite correct. Robert Emmenegger was the producer. I put this in my book that he had been promised this amazing footage of landing at an Air Force base, but it was probably at Holloman, as you say. And he used some footage they took there of a jet plane coming in the distance, and it had a little light on it. And many years after the fact, Grant Cameron, you're familiar with a Canadian
Yes.
researcher, he
Yes.
said, I confronted Emmenegger on this film footage. And he said, oh, that's just like background. What do you mean background? Well, we just got this little bit of a jet plane approaching that airfield, with the mountains in the background. We don't really claim that this is a spaceship. So that was a little misleading on his part, but they needed something because they were promised this footage. And at the last minute, they changed their minds and pulled the rug out from under them.
That's a shame,
So,
really, because there
yeah,
seemed to be a lot of mystery around that particular documentary, because it was also mentioned throughout the documentary that there was possibly a plan to disclose information through some type of project or some type of roadshow where they were going to let people know around the world that these are the beings that have come here, and so that sort of thing. I don't know how true that was, but I do know that it was that information was pulled from the documentary right at the last minute. It must have been quite a shocking shame, that really, I suppose.
right. This happened just after Nixon was reelected and assured of another 4 years. And there was talk, apparently, that he might disclose and make himself the big president. And remember, he might ask people, my old boss Eisenhower and we initiated the first contact. And here's some footage, and this is real. And then, like you say, Watergate broke. And there was one scandal after another, and the people had been lied to, and they thought, we better not add to it. Let's just pull the curtains shut again on the fact that the US government knows quite well we are being visited by some races of beings.
I mean,
Yeah.
Paul, it's fascinating stuff, and it's interesting you mentioned Nixon as well and how everything ended for him. What are your thoughts on? And there's a lot of disinformation around this very case, basically, but the thoughts on a deal that Eisenhower worked out supposedly after that meeting with humanoids. Have you got any information on that? Is that something that's disinformation? Is that something that's got some accuracy to it? And
Yeah.
in turn, this was said to have led to alien abduction cases. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. The late Art Campbell did some great research on a Holloman, was it Holloman Air Force Base in
Holloman. Yeah.
Kirtland, perhaps,
Mm.
in 1955, February 55, 1 year later, a number of sources told him that Eisenhower came back to New Mexico and put his plane down on the tarmac, what we call Air Force One. It was called the Columbine back then. And then he stepped out, and then an alien ship, two of them came down. One remained hovering overhead. The other landed on the tarmac near, according to these eyewitnesses. And one of them was an electrician who was climbing up a telephone pole in the base. And when he saw this stuff, he went scampering down real fast. But he described what he saw. And he was sure that was Eisenhower. He stepped out of Air Force One and walked over to this UFO. And I'm thinking, there may have been an agreement forged, and 1 year later, enough signatures of national security and American politicos and the extraterrestrials accepted this agreement to not show themselves and have an air base where they could receive American technology and without being bothered.
Mm.
I forget what part of the Nevada desert that was, but that might have been what we call S4, what Robert Lazar describes. I'm not sure if that is exactly the same one, but in that area where supposedly aliens land and give us a little technology and we give them some, hopefully not too much of great value, but again, friendly ones, human-like, not these little grays or giant monsters or reptilians or anything like that.
You have to always a lot of fascinating. I mean, they do get a little intertwined, a lot of these stories
Yes, they do
of
get
these
confused.
incidents. But do you
Yeah.
think, Paul, that the president would have had to debrief some of the military personnel after this incident that might have witnessed it? I mean, was there ever any talk about him having to debrief them afterwards to basically say, I don't know, let's not talk about this or something like that?
I think maybe his Joint Chiefs of Staff member at one point, that was Nathan R. Twining. A general who's very famous for some
Yeah.
UFO documents, including being asked to investigate Roswell by Harry Truman personally, and some documents expose what he found, feeling that it was extraterrestrial in nature. So Eisenhower promoted him and leaned on him heavily. And it's very interesting to know that almost as soon as Nathan R. Twining died, this Air Force pilot from the Eisenhower encounter stepped forward to tell his story. And he said, I'm the last person alive from this meeting. So I don't want the story to die out. It's of great historic value. You know, it really happened, he claimed. So he told the story wishing for anonymity, didn't want to give his name, but he said, everyone is dead from those days. And so I think Twining was either there or he was so close by, he was informed of everything. And he was a very important figure in ufology, as we call it in
Yeah.
your country and in my country in America.
Absolutely. And I think I remember doing creating a series about 4 years ago, along with UFO historian Richard Dolan. And I remember him discussing about one of the presidents, and that would have been the actor um,
Reagan.
Reagan?
Reagan, who'd
No.
apparently not only witnessed a UFO, but apparently he talks about possible roadside encounter
Mhm.
with a UFO. Do you know anything about that, Paul? Have you come across that information?
I certainly do, and I've been working on a book about Reagan's close encounters. I can't find anything as dramatic as what Eisenhower did, but there are
Mm,
two allegations, and one really serious and believed is that he was, as governor of California, flying over the state of California outside Bakersfield, and the pilot looked out the window, and they all looked out the window, and look at that! This big, bright, shining light just came zipping out of nowhere, kind of bobbed and weaved along with their airplane. I think a private jet. I was going to say
mm,
a Cessna, but now I don't remember the exact kind. And it was late at night, like 9 or 10. And Reagan was utterly fascinated and exciting. And the UFO, the craft pulled ahead. And he said, "Let's follow it and see where it goes." And they did for a while. And then suddenly it shot off into the heavens. And his pilot, Bill Painter, said later, "This really did happen. We saw it. I saw it. Reagan told me to follow it." And, when he was like a week or two later, Reagan ran into a newspaper reporter and said, "I had this event happen to me." And he was still all excited and pumped up about it. And the reporter said, "Mr. Reagan, you believe in UFOs?" And he realized he'd been talking too much. He was a conservative with a conservative base, and he needed to keep his mouth shut. So he just said, I'm an agnostic or something like that. So that one's most interesting. And from
yeah.
maybe 20 years earlier, he was on his way to a party with Lucille Ball and William Holden, who were really good
Uh,
friends,
yes.
and in Los Angeles. And on their way, he and Nancy were driving and at night, and they pulled over because this UFO landed right near the road. And they saw it, and they went rushing into the party like a hour later, all excited. And we've just seen a UFO. And Lucy told the story quite seriously. And she wasn't kidding. She said, "I was there. Desi was there. They were still married at that time." And
Yes.
that Reagan was just all bubbling about this at the time. So
Yeah. I did hear
that
it.
may have been yeah,
I did
this
hear
is
about
like
that,
two
Paul.
different encounters there. Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I overheard a conversation by actress Shirley MacLaine discussing that very incident.
Right. With Lucy.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's right, and it was quite well known amongst the, should you say, the actresses and actors of that time who was obviously were attending that party. I mean, we don't really get so much colourful stuff like that in the UK, do we, Marcus? And I can't imagine our Prime Minister Starmer going to meet with it. They probably wouldn't want to see him, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, Starmer's in the press only a few days ago talking about possibly looking at UFO documentation. So you never know. I want to go on to Truman a little bit later, but sticking with Reagan, Paul. He, he's an interesting character for lots of different reasons. Not just UFOs, but I mean, it wasn't just the quip to Steven Spielberg. You know, there was writings in his diary about knowing of off-world vehicles that could fit hundreds of people, which people have said, well, it's just his ramblings. And also his connection to George Bush Sr., who, of all the presidents, is likely to know more than anybody else.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts of all that setup? Because in effect, you could argue Bush was kind of pulling the strings right the way through Reagan's presidency. So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on those type of?
Yeah, I know George H.W. Bush was very tight-lipped, played it close to the vest, but he went to a campaign event for his son Jeb when he was running for president unsuccessfully. And somebody in the audience stood up and said, Mr. President, what's this with UFOs? Are we being visited? He snapped at him and said, I know plenty, but I'm not saying, I know about the UFOs or something like that. They hustled the guy out of the audience and they hustled the president out of there. He had said too much. He was getting pretty old and a little cantankerous, but he kind of revealed himself. There's a filmmaker who said, I was on a flight with George H.W. Bush, and he was telling someone maybe after a few drinks that I didn't really believe this stuff. And then someone showed me some footage of an extraterrestrial that we had captured. And that, Bush had said this in front of someone else. There's no great corroborating evidence. Great story, but he's passed on now, of course, but he didn't really come forward with what he knew. But being a former director of the CIA, he probably read plenty of files and knew it's official government policy. Keep your yap shut. Don't touch off a panic. Because the whole dam will burst and all kinds of Freedom of Information Acts and lawsuits will follow, and as they should. So the American people won't be in the dark from their own representative government. But I keep hearing this rumor that in 2027, something's supposed to happen where we're going to be told the truth or aliens will land or some business. And usually when a date is set like that, nothing happens.
Well, that's actually right, Paul. That's usually the case, isn't it? We end up with a lot of rising in information, and then suddenly it goes very quiet. Paul, what do you make of the recent things that have been happening now, though? I mean, over the last several months, regarding the UAP drones over New Jersey, we had President Trump basically say, I'm going to try and find out. A report was released, interestingly saying that the FAA had cleared them. And but apparently a lot of these strange, unidentified objects in the sky, which might be US owned, were over military bases, and which caused a bit of a stir. Do you have the same sort of feeling that they might be US secret drones which were up there that people misidentifying, or the phenomenon?
I think some of that could be, yeah. And then it started to show up on the news every night. So I think private citizens started to gum up the works and send up their drones and start seeing who they can fool and making a total mess out of it. But it's possible some of those could have been extraterrestrial. Somebody reported in New Jersey, there's this object the size of a Volkswagen above my house, just sitting there in space for 5 hours. What drone technology do we have like that?
No,
You
I don't
can't
know.
tell me that the American government wants that attention, so some of that might have been people from another world just looking to
I
show
think
off. And
so. Yeah, I think
yeah,
it's. If you think about it, it could have been a very interesting plan here, how to dilute a situation, because these things were seen over the skies for quite some time. Over three, I think it was huge amounts
yeah,
of people saw these things and took photographs and videos. And to dilute the situation, maybe that they did have the FAA say, well, you know what, we cleared them, because everybody kind of think it kind of went very flat then. People thought,
yeah,
oh, well,
sure did.
it's all our stuff. But then that's a very clever way of diluting the situation when things are up there, which might not be ours, of course.
When American presidents go on talk shows or chat shows, as you call them, they're almost always asked, all right, are we being visited or not? And they give an evasive, slippery answer. Oh, well, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. Or that's national security stuff. Can't talk about that. And, they know the answer. They can't give it. If there was nothing to it, they'd say it right up front.
Yeah.
There's nothing to it. We're not being visited, but they never say that. And so I think that may be the case with President Trump. he says, yeah, we're going to look into that. We're going to, I find that very interesting. He told his son, who interviewed him on like Fox News or something, that's a very interesting case. We find some very interesting things. Well, that doesn't give us any sort of answer. And
Yeah.
again, they're playing the slippery, evasive game, which makes you think that there may well be some friendly or benign beings from another world, and maybe a small percentage of them are not so friendly, and they don't
Yeah.
want to touch off a panic even today. Uh, it's so frustrating. I hope the British government or someone in Europe really unleashes the dam and opens up their most secret files and video footage and such. I know that one fellow was working in the Vatican and said his source within the Vatican says they've got footage of the Eisenhower encounter, those film cameras that were rolling.
Yes.
And he said that one was in black and white and the other footage is in color. And the black and white footage, I think he said, ends abruptly because the aliens put on that air show and their technology got so close, it shorted out the camera. So, yeah, and that's how realistic a description this is. And you wonder, well, can't you release or leak these,
I could believe
films?
that.
That would
Yeah,
blow people's minds, I think.
I
And
could
that may be
totally.
why we don't see them.
It's probably true. I mean, I can totally believe that the Vatican, if anybody would have that, the Vatican would likely have it or a copy of it, probably on the shelf next to the filming of the Fatima incident. Which by all intents and purposes seems to have been another type of UFO encounter, if you look between the lines. But I would say, yeah, I mean, I think the Vatican have been sat on a lot of stuff for a long time, and of course, you know what? I think they're keeping quite tight-lipped about it as well.
1933, they apparently had a crashed disk near Magenta in northern Italy. And Mussolini jumped on that and like jailed anyone who dared to even talk about it. And this David Grush, a whistleblower for the American Intelligence Services, said, I didn't believe it at first either, but I kept reading and hearing about this, and it's apparently true. The Italians moved it to like a concrete bunker during the war so it wouldn't get destroyed and they could explore it, try to exploit it for the technology involved. And during 44, the summer of 44, Americans invaded along with Allied forces. And Mr. Grush said, we scooped it. We stole it from the Italians since we conquered them, the spoils of victory there. And I'm from Cape Girardeau, Missouri. That's my original
Oh,
hometown.
Missouri,
And we're
right.
the first ones, I think, in America to have a crash in late April 1941. And I'm working on an updated version on that book. And it's just fascinating as can be. We're doing the best we can, all of us researchers working with shoestring budgets and not being in the loop. And maybe it's a good thing that if we started writing about this, we'd be dead by now. So we're free to talk. It's just that we can't have the really hard evidence. It just seems to slip through our fingers all the time.
Mm.
Oh, can I just leap on that there because you mentioned the Cape Girardeau case from Missouri in '41, and I want to bring in the UFO crash, alleged UFO crash in '33 Italy as well. Truman pretty much knew what was going on, you would say. I would certainly say so as well. So he would undoubtedly have been aware of the 33 crash, which, like you say, that got scooped up from Italy, transported somehow to the United States. There was even soldiers who have gone on record saying that they found it quite amazing that the bunker where this was found was completely undamaged, where everything else was like,
Yeah.
basically, almost like they knew.
Yeah.
So that came, we had the 41 crash. How do you think, when you look at James Forrestal, who I believe was the first Secretary of Defense, he would have undoubtedly have also been aware of these.
Oh, yes. And look
And
what happened to him.
he met a very suspicious end. His
He
own
did.
family will testify to that as well. So, would you say this is where the cover-up kind of begins? When Truman, with Truman's knowledge, with these two crashes, obviously then we have Roswell, which could very well have been a cover for all of this stuff. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? This seems where it seems to like kind of start the modern UFO era.
Amazingly, Harry Truman lived in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the summer of 1906. He was in military training in our National Guard armory there, and he knew plenty of people in town. And in 1920, a young vice presidential candidate came to town named Franklin Roosevelt. He was in Cape Girardeau too. So
Right.
the two of them were high ranking Freemasons who knew Cape Girardeau. And in 1940, just prior to the 41 incident in a farm field outside of Cape, uh, FDR did not really even support Truman for reelection. And yet, within a year or two, suddenly Truman was all about high profile investigation of the Army. And Roosevelt made a complete 180 and said, you know, you're on the ticket for 44. You're my personal choice. And Roosevelt knew he was very sick and could die. So he had to pick someone very knowledgeable about, you know, alien visitation. And I think that's maybe a ticket to the presidency for Truman, who did indeed have the power of the presidency to investigate the Roswell incident, and he knew what that was about, and so many UFO sightings in the late 40s and early 50s. Even supposedly, I keep hearing, Truman gave an order to shoot him down, and that was quickly rescinded when that didn't go too well. That our pilots started to have crashes or airline crashes, and so it's kind of scary. I don't think so many of these incidents were on purpose. Again, I keep reading like Leslie Kean, who wrote this book about how higher alien technology clashes with our own cruder technology and shorts out power stations, airplane engines, car engines. As you saw Steven Spielberg's movie, where Richard Dreyfuss is driving a truck and the engine dies in the middle of nowhere, and a whole town's power goes out. These were taken from real life stories.
Yes, yeah,
So,
counts.
Truman probably knew all of this and the dangers of even just flitting about, looking around in our atmosphere. Even if you meant no harm, it was knocking out our power. So, it was a subject he took so seriously. A man named General Landry, Robert Landry, came forward after Truman's death and said, Harry asked me to give him UFO updates on everything going on, this just supply oral updates and reports to him. And, you know, who does that unless you really know what's going on? And another amazing footage, and you may have seen this before, in the July 1952 UFO flap over Washington, D.C., some reporters cornered President Truman and asked him, what about these flying saucers? He says, oh, yes, we've always had flying saucers and whatnot. We've discussed that with the military at every conference. Really, the official story is the US government says they don't exist or there's nothing to them. And he just admitted on camera. We take it so seriously at every conference, high level military conference. We talk about, you know, flying saucers and UFOs. So we've really been getting the shaft for like 70, 80 years, dating back to at least 1941 in America, where we're felt to be children who can't handle the truth. And we have to have subterfuge and evasive responses and secret reports and, you know, locking everything up until someday, a generation or two later, maybe we can leak it or, you know, announce it. Yeah, we've been visited for a long time now.
I heard a rumor, Paul. Well, it's kind of a story in regards to President Carter. Although that I'm aware that he had a sighting of a UFO, but I don't know how true this is, and you might be able to cast a bit of light on this. But he was somehow maybe briefed to some degree on the UFO phenomena. I believe he might have been at the White House at the time, and he took it very seriously. And I don't know where it was documented, but it was written that he wept and stated something like, "Well, my daughter's just coming into this world." I mean, do you know any element of truth to that, Paul, or
Right.
have you heard about that?
Even Carter came forward during his presidential campaign and says, I don't laugh at people who say they've seen UFOs. I've seen one myself. He said this out loud, and he talked about as governor of Georgia, he and some uh, fellow Kiwanis Club members, I think they were leaving a restaurant where they had a meeting. They looked up in the sky, and there's this big lit object. And he wanted to let people know I've seen one of these too. And he promised if I get elected president, I'm going to make public all the UFO files and we'll get to the bottom of this. And apparently he was briefed and he clammed up like that. He wasn't going to be allowed to go to the American public, like the General's National Security Administration, NASA. They all probably got on him and said, no, we've been keeping the lid on this. We're going to keep it on even further. We don't think the American people are ready. So that's again
Yes.
frustrating. When Carter was asked about it in later years, he said, "Well, yeah, I saw an unidentified flying object. Maybe it was Uranus or something,
Yeah.
or a star or something." He tried to backpedal, and he didn't really want to talk about it. So
Wasn't
again, secrecy
wasn't
rules.
wasn't there a President Paul that threatened to send soldiers into Area 51 because he was not being kept in the
Yeah,
loop? Which president was
That's that would have been Eisenhower in the years after the 54 encounter. One source said I talked to Eisenhower, who I would brief him. I think he was an intelligence agent who was in touch with the CIA and military intelligence, helped to coordinate it, and said I used to brief Eisenhower and Nixon. And Eisenhower was growing furious that there was this air base in the Nevada desert, and he wasn't being given,
Mm,
all the latest scoop on what's going on out there. And he said, I want you to tell, I forget, like the director of the CIA or somebody like that, if you
yes.
don't give me a full report, I'm going to send the Third Army Division in
That's
after you. And, I'm the commander in chief. You will do as I say, or I'll use force. And apparently that did work. And they gave him a more complete secret report on what was going on out there.
right. Right. Fascinating, isn't
Fascinating
it?
stuff.
Yeah,
Absolutely
it is.
fascinating stuff. I mean, just going from Eisenhower to Nixon, because I think this is a fascinating encounter. Now, there's some people who say we need to take this with a pinch of salt, but you've wrote about this as well extensively. The
Yeah.
Nixon Gleason encounter. Now, considering Nixon's connections to Eisenhower, which we've just been speaking about, he undoubtedly would have been able to, had access, and just knowing his personality, he would have, if he could have got in there, he would have got in there. So you'll know this better than me. What are your thoughts on the Nixon Gleason thing? Is there some
Yeah.
truth to this?
I believe there is, according to Beverly McKittrick Gleason, Jackie's ex-wife. He came home one night pale and shaken. He was just like a ghost. And she said, "Where have you been?" And he said, "Nixon took me out to an air base and showed me the proof. I seen the alien bodies for myself." And he wasn't acting. He was like smoking and drinking more than usual. He was all shook up. He didn't work in movies for years after this. And that he had been badgering Nixon for a long time. They'd been friends since the early 60s. Can you tell me about this? And Nixon wouldn't tell him anything. But Nixon got his tail caught in the proverbial crack with Watergate. His
Mm,
men, the burglars, were threatening to talk to investigators and to the media, and it was going to ruin Nixon's great image and his popularity, and might even get him sent to jail. So he had to come up with hush money to keep the burglars from talking. Where is he going to get this money? Nixon bugged himself in the White House, as
mm,
odd as this sounds, and the tapes were heard later, and you can hear Nixon saying, "This damn hush money, where are we going to get this?" He was really upset in January 73. The month after the apparent Gleason encounter, Nixon's all calm about the hush money. He says, "Oh, we've got that. I know where we can get our hands on that. It's not a problem." Jackie was worth up to like 14 million per year. He had a huge income from TV, movies, record albums. He spent money freely. And he used to go on a radio show in New York City and ask, I want the hard proof of extraterrestrial visitation. At first, he offered 100,000, then he made it a 500,000. And by the early 70s, he said, "I'll give $1 million to anyone who can show me the hard proof." Well, I think Nixon took him up on this. And one night, Jackie hosted a golf tournament at the Inverary Golf Club in Miami, where he lived. And Nixon came down in a helicopter that afternoon and spoke to the press alongside Jackie. They were great pals. And Nixon took off in the helicopter because there was a landing pad on the golf course right behind Jackie's home. I'm pretty darn sure they sent that helicopter back to pick Jackie up at after dark around 8:30, 9 o'clock. All had Jackie had to do was walk out and get in, and it took him directly to what was the airbase south of Miami? My mind is blanking. Well, it was an airfield just south of Miami. Naturally, I can't remember the name of it.
Oh,
But Nixon was
now.
apparently there and greeted him and took him over to a secluded part of the airbase under heavy guard. They went into this kind of laboratory, and he said, "All right, Jackie, here it is." And Jackie reported to his wife there were four dead alien bodies. They were diminutive. They were little aliens with big ears and big bug eyes, kind of spooky looking, almost dwarfish, Jackie told his wife later that very night. And if you ever heard of the 1955 Hopkinsville, Kentucky
Yes.
alien invasion or attack, that's an exact match for the description of those creatures that apparently came down in the summer of 55. And Jackie saw four bodies that matched that. Laid out on these laboratory tables. He said they looked like they were ready for embalming or an autopsy or something. And there's one source that said Jackie was then taken to an air base hangar that you can see from the highway. It's so obvious, a big hangar. And he was taken inside and shown a silver round spaceship that was kind of what I call alive. It was up in the air and being held down by tethers, ropes to be held in place. And Jackie got a good look at this silver disc. He got his money's worth for $1 million
Yeah.
bucks. And he came home after that, and he was just, oh my God, I saw it at last. His lifelong dream. He was obsessed with UFOs and ETs his whole life. He had a personal library, even bigger than Steve Mera's. It had 1,700 books on
Wow.
UFOs and the paranormal, and it's now in the hands of the University of Miami. They kept all of his books on
Wow.
hypnosis and reincarnation and aliens and such. And so Jackie was so obsessed, he would go to this paranormal bookstore and they just started shipping him all the latest so he didn't have to go in there because they knew he wanted them and was going to pay big money for them. And he
Yeah.
just wanted every last detail. He knew the last detail of every obscure UFO sighting and would even call sometimes authors and UFO sighters in person, say, "This is Jackie Gleason. Can you tell me more about this story?" He was
Wow.
obsessed beyond what anyone today is, interested in the story.
Yeah.
He was something else, Jackie was.
Didn't he actually build a house shaped
Yes,
like
this does this. He
yeah.
built a UFO house so he could feel like I'm living in a spaceship. It was kind of on the edge of a cliff, not too close so it wouldn't fall off, and it had big bay windows, and it's still there
It's
outside.
still
Peep
there, is it?
still,
Is it? Yeah.
yeah. He was living
Wow.
in New York City at the time, and he had these millions of dollars to spend. So he custom built his own flying saucer
Wow.
house. Who does this? Only Jackie. He also had some Tesla scopes, some telescopes by Tesla, and some Tesla coils, like he wanted to contact them. His stepson said Jackie had like dozens of ham radios. And he wasn't looking for pilots and
Yes.
conversations by Americans. He wanted to see if he can catch some communications from extraterrestrials flying over South Florida at the time. So what a character!
He
And
really is
now the
interesting.
Eisenhower tale. I'm in touch with a movie producer who wants to turn that into a film. And now I'm in touch with a second producer who wants to turn the Nixon Gleason into a movie. So hopefully
Brilliant.
we'll see this on the big screen or Netflix or some streaming channel, and the whole world will get a glance at this if it's well done. And
Yes.
it's just a terrific. Both of them are just terrific stories.
I know there's quite a bit of secrecy around Spielberg's. I read today that he's just finished wrapping up filming for his new UFO movie, but it is so tight-lipped. It is, it's very difficult to get any information
Yeah, exactly.
out.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting, and I thought it was quite interesting that he actually was filming in New Jersey as well. I thought maybe he wanted
Is
to
that
capture,
right? Of
maybe he
all
wanted to
places.
capture real things,
Yeah. Was he responsible for this? No, this is quite interesting. What a coincidence. Here's another coincidence. He was dating Kate Capshaw, an American actress who was in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. They would go flying into Cape Girardeau's airport to pick up Jessica Capshaw's, the daughter of Kate Capshaw, who lived nearby. And they would come down at the airport, and that's apparently not far from what I can tell of the 1941 UFO crash site. And who else was in and out of that airport? Harry Truman,
Yes.
Ronald Reagan, Robert F. Kennedy. He came to town in Cape Girardeau in 1968, and the first thing he blurted out was, "I've always wanted to come to Cape Girardeau." And I'm thinking, why would you say such a thing with supposedly this obscure town? But he may have read those files and he knew what happened here in 41.
Mm.
And he brought a NASA astronaut with him. And, they're in and out of the airport in Cape. I just don't know what else they were doing. But
Mm.
you'd think my hometown was the most popular, important place in the world sometimes.
Yeah, well, I have to
Fascinating.
ask the question, Paul. What do you think the situation is in regarding Kennedy and his assassination? Do you think, because there's a lot of rumors and talk out there, do you think it had some connection to the UFO phenomena and Marilyn Monroe and all these different things? I hear a lot of different conspiracy things, but do you think there's any truth to in regards to witnessing the phenomena or new information?
There might be. Marilyn Monroe had a friend named Robert Schweitzer. She confided in him and called him a number of times, and he put someone else on the phone to listen in to verify that's really Marilyn Monroe, my old flame. She's still calling like days before her death. She told Schweitzer, according to Schweitzer, that JFK did go to an airfield out west and saw extraterrestrial bodies. They were small and gray and big black eyes and that sort of thing. Schweitzer gave that interview before he passed away and said this. Now, that's not proof, but it's a very interesting story that
Mm,
JFK and maybe RFK gave her a lot of pillow talk and they discussed some really exciting things. They wanted to impress her and she was inquisitive, so were they. And I think JFK was a victim of the mafia. They were outraged by the Kennedy war on organized crime. And what do you do in a war? You kill or be killed. So they snuffed out Kennedy with a little help from some intelligence people.
mm,
And
yeah.
Robert, I don't know. It's very suspicious what happened to Robert Kennedy as well. Will we ever get to the absolute hard facts and truth and shocking files come to light? I don't know on
No.
either case, but I don't think either were killed for their knowledge of UFOs, though.
Oh,
Yeah.
can I just ask you one thing about the Kennedy thing? Because I agree with you. I think it's pretty well documented that there's mafia involvement in the assassination. Um, some researchers have put forward, and it's not a secret, that Kennedy was looking to work with the Soviet Union on the moon landings. He wanted to
Yeah,
have a joint mission, and there was, funnily enough, high-ranking members of NASA that were also Freemasons, who these researchers say just simply didn't want that, and they didn't want that because they knew there was things to discover on the moon. Now, I know we're getting into speculation territory here.
yeah,
Did those
yeah.
kind of suggestions have any credence? And off the back of that, um, do you think secret societies and Freemasons and such, do you think that they kind of are so ingrained within presidencies and people around them that is almost how these secrets are kept? It's not so much through patriotism, more through loyalty to these societies that have probably put them where they are.
Yeah, my maternal grandfather was a Freemason. My paternal great grandfather was a Freemason. They're largely really good guys who want to help in their community and not get credit for it. I have high regard for them, but it's a fact. FDR was a 32nd degree Freemason, and I find out from research, almost all of his cabinet, he picked Freemasons, and he picked Harry Truman eventually to be his vice president and, go on to succeed him. So being a Freemason was huge. The Speaker of the House was a Freemason, and other key members of Congress, and the Director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, and Clyde Tolson, his good buddy. So, they have secret meetings, secret handshakes, secret languages, secret rings and jewelry and such. And they keep secrets. And so I think this was a common bond that they kept under wraps at the highest level. And that's another thing that helped crush the Cape Girardeau, Missouri story and maybe other stories down through the decades is that the Masonic Society, even if they're up to good things, don't want this discussed, at least not at this time. JFK was not a member. I think the last member was Harry Truman, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
Yeah.
And so, it's something that helped crush the facts from coming to light.
Well,
Before, I
he
just want to point out there quickly as well that it's not an attack on Freemasonry. It's
no,
more
no.
a case
Yeah,
of particular people who happen to be Freemasons. Sorry,
yeah,
sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think I've done a lot of research on it, and it goes back a long, long, long time. And the idealisms of being able to contact intelligences beyond our dimension or our reality. I mean, there was a lot of different things, prosecutions and many different establishments where had that idea about being able to maybe communicate with intelligences from other worlds or other realities. And it is a lot of that. It goes back a long time. In more recent times, though, Paul, we have people coming forward like, for instance, Professor of Religion, Religious Studies, Dr. Pusalka, Diana Pusalka. Now, she's recently talked about how when NASA launched certain rockets, they have sigilization on them, and some of them are ancient Latin or other languages. And she was trying to find out, why do you do certain launches at certain times? Um, and you've got these words on them. I mean, who's up there to read them? And she was told, well, maybe it's for them. And she said, well, you know, who's them, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And
You mind explaining that?
yeah, well, she talked about some of the early rocket inventors that apparently got downloaded information to help them succeed in the building of certain technologies that may have helped us get to the stars. And that the idea was to kind of pay homage, in a sense, like the Masonic flag being on the moon. There's also a Masonic ritual that took place as well.
There is, yeah.
And but quite recently she mentioned something very intriguing, and that sometimes they had these kind of strange rituals at the times of these launches, certain times of the day, where they'd invite the president, and she was referring to Obama attending and his wife, to attend this ceremony, which was considered to be to him a celebration, but to ask him to stand in a certain place and look at certain part of the sky or a certain direction at the time of the launch, which was very symbolistic or ritualistic. But she was talking about that, you know, they've done this with a number of different presidents over the years, introducing them to the launching of certain technologies, satellites and, you know, rockets into space. I thought that was very interesting what she was saying.
I'll admit right up front, I've never seen a UFO. I would like to, as long as they're friendly. If you're listening, but it goes back even to the Foo Fighters that Churchill and Eisenhower discussed, according to an eyewitness. He was an RAF pilot who was a bodyguard for Churchill, and he overheard them talking about these glowing orbs or discs and things following the planes as they went over battlefields and over the English Channel. And he overheard Eisenhower and Churchill agree, we need to keep the muzzle on this. It might disrupt people's religious faith and faith in government, and the fact that, you know, we don't really own the skies, that there's an advanced craft already that we can't account for, which is a polite way of saying, you know, visitors from another world. And maybe in the 40s and 50s, you can understand keeping the lid on this. But I think people are much more educated and braced up emotionally, psychologically. It's no longer a shock. When I talk to people nowadays, they say, oh, yeah, we can't be alone. No way. And
Mm.
I've seen too many things, or I've heard of too many things. Right behind me, you can see my door. If I opened that door about 5, 6 years ago, I had a little old lady in her 90s across the hall, very Christian churchgoer, and she shocked me and said, "Yeah, when I was a little girl on a farm in Missouri." A long time ago, I guess it was like 80, 85 years earlier. She said a spaceship came down in the pasture and she wanted to run towards it. And she said, no, her father said, no, just let them do whatever they got to do. And this was the last person I thought would have a story like that. And so it just, you know, it just could be anybody that could tell, well, but when am I going to see something?
It's
Not
absolutely
yet,
right. It does
anyway.
work out like that. I've done this. I've found myself again talking to an old lady. It walked past one day when I was doing some filming at a location, and I said, "Oh, I was just interested in the old building. I believe there's been a lot of strange reports around this old building." And she said, "Oh, yeah, yeah." I said, and she said, "Just down the road, I saw a UFO land." And I was like, "What?
Well, yeah,
How? What? What?" You know, and it just goes to show there's probably a lot more incidents out there than anybody could actually imagine. It's really, to be
yeah.
honest with you, and we don't
It
actually
had to have
get to
been
hear them.
mind blowing for the people of 1941 on a farm outside Cape Girardeau where they found this crashed disc and three dead gray bodies. And
Mm,
the debris was all over, and there was a fire in the field. The fire department came out, and one guy said, my grandfather confessed when he was dying of cancer, that he was one of the firemen who responded to the call that night in late April of 1941, and that they put out the fire, and he thought he'd pick up a little souvenir, and he put a piece of metal debris in his pocket. He got caught by the Army, and they chewed him out and handed over, and then they kicked him out of the site. And he said he was probably being watched with his phone tapped around Cape Girardeau in the aftermath to make sure he didn't open his mouth and start some trouble, start
Yeah.
revealing the story. So that's how it was squelched with pressure from maybe the FBI and the military intelligence. Even back then, even JFK found himself bugged and followed by the FBI in 1941. He was working in Washington, D.C. for the Office of Naval Intelligence and carrying on an affair with a German woman that some felt was a spy that was pro-Nazi. She really was not. Inga Arvad, and JFK called her Inga Binga. He loved her quite a bit. He loved a lot of women quite a bit, apparently. He was quite fond of the ladies. But even this young naval ensign who was in naval intelligence is being, tailed, and his his secret hideaway is being bugged by the FBI even that far back. So it just goes to show you that the American government can really crack down on people
I think they learned to,
ruthlessly.
really, because of the so many incidents have been reported. I mean, if we go back to the early 1900s, who would have been the president then? Because we had an incident at the Aurora, Texas, alleged UFO crash that took place, but I'm not too sure who would have been president back then, or even if it had been
1897, I think
documented.
that. It was 1897 in Texas, wasn't it? I'm not
Was
sure
it
it was.
1897?
Yeah, it was. It
Yeah, I
was
mean
part of
that's
the airship sightings, the wave of sightings that swept across the United States.
Yeah, there was a lot of them back then. Yeah,
I mean,
good
Paul,
point.
just to jump in there. I just want to go back to the Missouri case that you mentioned. What have you heard about? I was contacted. I'd written an article on this, just a bog standard article, a year, a few years back, and someone contacted me saying that she was a granddaughter of a reverend who had been called out there, and she said that he had been asked to perform last rites, basically, on a dying alien entity. Is there any credence to that? Because I've researched this, and it tends to come back that some people say it's a load of, it's just a hoax, it's not, it's nonsense. Other people say, yeah, very much so, and there were bodies recovered from that crash. What's your research told you about that, if anything?
I believe from the various angles that I've managed to accumulate, it really did happen. That Reverend Huffman said, I was called by someone associated with the police department, and he came by in an unmarked car, and we all thought it was a plane crash. So they got out there about 13 to 15 miles outside of Cape Girardeau in farm territory, and they went across a field for about a fourth of a mile. And sure enough, he said there was this downed circular damaged disc. And these three bodies, two were dead, and the third was dying in front of him. And he laid down, or he knelt down and held the wrist of the creature and said some prayers. I don't think, as a Baptist minister, he administered any last rites. That's Catholic, but he said the prayers. He was there to offer spiritual comfort to victims, and so he did. And he went home that night, kind of like Jackie Gleason, and blurted out the whole story because they were wondering, what happened to you? And he said, I'm going to tell you this story this once, and I'm never going to tell it again. And apparently he lived up to his word. He died in 1959 without coming forward. His widow spoke to Charlotte Huffman Mann,
Yep.
who went forward in the 1990s with the tale. And she passed away, I'm told, last fall, but she never wavered from her story, didn't change it. She said grandfather said these things and he was a man of fine character. So I investigated it, and they said he really was a good man who tried to convert people to Christianity, baptisms, and all that sort of thing. He was not a drinker or a drugger. And he was in mid 44, he was transferred to a Baptist church in Oklahoma. And the story kind of faded out from there. People who were in Cape went to war. The chief of police in 1941 died in battle in World War II, as one example. So, the Army came in, squelched the story from the start, and then other events just kind of dispersed it. And the Roswell case just took all the oxygen out of the atmosphere, so to speak. It's the most famous one. But I'm telling you, my hometown of Cape Girardeau, we beat them by 6 years.
yes. Yeah, yes, you did actually. Well, do you think there's any truth to these stories of a non-human who claimed to have been from Venus, who was associated with high-ranking generals or maybe even presidential levels.
Yeah. I don't put any stock after what I read about the planet Venus. It has tremendous, like
I
20
know.
times the air pressure, barometric pressure or whatever than planet Earth. It's got toxic gases in its atmosphere. No being could even survive for 2 seconds anywhere near planet Venus. There was this bogus story by Dr. Frank Stranges that
Yes.
Valiant Thor, came down and they ushered him right to the President Eisenhower's Oval Office. And he gave the date for this claim. And I looked it up. Eisenhower was not even in the country at the time.
Brilliant.
He was in the Caribbean at a summit meeting. And the idea that an alien would land and you'd take him straight to the president is just fairy tale. Frank Stranges, I know, meant well, and he was quite interested in UFOs, but he also had an arrest record where he had been part of a drug ring that tried to, yeah, you don't hear about
Right.
this too much. And he
No.
spent, I think, a little time in the pokey before they were flying
Right.
in drugs or something. So I think,
Wow.
that's
Yeah,
kind
it's
of a,
such a colourful
there's not a
subject.
lot of credibility to that one.
Yeah, there's been a lot of reports though. What people said, oh yes, they told me they were from Venus. Well, they might have done, but might not have been coming from there. That was the thing, because we just don't know. Are we always being told the truth by these non-human entities? We don't know. It's very vague. Sometimes they said they came from Mars. Sometimes they said they came from the moon, and now it's further and further out in space with many different various planets. It's really hard, and I think this. Do you think this is lent hand to the new term UAP as opposed to UFO? Are we trying to sort of get away from the last 70, 80 years of all that? I don't know, mysteries, conspiracies that keep maybe trying to keep people quiet about this sort of thing into more of
Yeah.
a modern day process.
I don't like UAP, anomalous aerial phenomena, I think it
Yeah,
is, or it makes it sound like it could be swamp gas or,
exactly. Yeah.
hallucination or the planet Venus or something they saw. And, when we're talking UFO, we all know unidentified flying object, a solid object or a disc or craft or cigar shaped or whatever. So I almost never use UAP. I'm a rebel and a rogue, and I won't go along with that stuff. But
Yes.
I think the modern stories that you point out, both of you, that in America, New Jersey, the East Coast, something funny was going on, and
Mm,
it wasn't entirely Earth-based, I don't think.
no,
It was a
I agree.
mixture, and this and that, and some civilian participation, military operations. There's even a claim that Iran had a submarine that was releasing these drones to confuse us. I don't know if there's any truth to that. It seems a
Yeah.
little odd. Every night you go to a New Jersey neighborhood and hang in space over the air,
Yeah.
over people's homes. It's just really weird.
No.
And again, that story seems to have died out now. And it's
Yeah.
like on to the next thing, I
I, th
suppose.
I think they tried to do the same thing when it was the Washington. There was one object over the Capitol building, wasn't there? And they were bombarding the hell out of this thing,
Yeah,
and I think they tried to push that as that might have been some type of Japanese or Chinese, should we say, balloon or something
yeah.
like that at the time. But
Flocks of birds. Yeah.
yeah, it's
It
just
showed up on
crazy.
radar, and that people saw these discs. Oh, they were all mistaken. Those were birds. So, whatever
Yeah.
lame claim that I know J. Allen Hynek was part of the American government, U.S. Air Force Project Blue Book to look into these things. And he found so many hokey stories that they had to make up, including swamp gas,
Mm.
that he got
He
so
didn't want
disgusted he
to, did
quit.
he?
Yeah, he just
Yeah.
he just quit and decided to look into these things for real, and he felt that some of them were real. He was a good man, tried to get to the truth. He died of cancer in '84, I think it was.
Mhm.
But I liked the fact that they don't forget him, and they made a whole mini series about J. Allen Hynek, and
Yes.
it's exciting to hear what Spielberg, who knew Hynek, knows, and what his new movie will be all about.
I often think our TV shows or films sometimes little pieces of truth that are being put out
Yeah, yeah,
because we do tend to find little things like that sometimes, don't we? But later on, we find out, oh, that's interesting because it was in this particular movie. I think sometimes maybe they do have little clues as to some of the things that
yeah.
have gone on in the past.
And then Hollywood gets a little creative to make a movie and sell tickets. And I'm kind of worried about what my two books will turn into on the big screen if they get
Yes.
that far. But we'll see. It's a little out of my control. Once you sell the rights, they can do whatever they want.
No.
What I speak to these producers, they seem pretty serious and enthusiastic about telling the story. And you don't want these stories to die out, as I've written in the books, and it would be great if they became mainstream movies. Nixon himself, this incident was over 50 years ago, and I'm sure there's young people today. Who's Nixon?
Exactly.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
so that's a shame. It's taking so long to get these tales out. What FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy did, and even Nixon. I think the trail goes a little cold from there. The presidents may not be told quite as much as what the predecessors knew. They knew a lot, in my opinion. And I just wish we could be trusted with the truth.
Paul, can I just ask you, because you've kind of said it yourself there, I was just going to say, once you get past, certainly past Reagan and the Bush administration, you almost get the impression that this information has been pulled back slightly.
Right.
So, you know, first of all, do you think it's certain presidents that might be, that might have this information revealed to them, and is this because they're kind of on an inner circle, so to speak? And how much do you think, going back to the 50s, 60s, 70s era, how much do you think the Cold War played a part in all of this, in the UFO secrecy?
Yeah,
Because
that's a good point. They didn't want to touch off any sort of panic or any sort of war. That apparently Kennedy was concerned about UFOs possibly being misidentified as American warships headed to Russia or vice versa. And that was apparently part of the red hotline that they had installed to make sure there's better communication. There was a UFO memorandum from JFK about a week before he died, talking about sharing information with the Soviets, the space program, and other space things. I forget the exact wording. And like he kind of wanted to open up this subject, but I believe he was marked for death by the mafia well before that memorandum came out. And so that ended that. So presidents are curious like everyone else, and some may have wanted to tell the public, but they got convinced, they have loved ones, family members. I don't know if they would be told it would be a shame if your daughter is met with an accident. If you were to talk about this,
Mm.
I can't believe a president would be blackmailed or threatened like this, but you never know. There are citizens who want safety for their families as well.
Mm.
What truly goes on behind the scenes, I don't know. I'm just a humble little nobody out in Missouri. But you read certain stories and you kind of have to separate the wheat from the chaff and the fact from the fiction. And as you say, little bits and pieces, I think, get installed in movies and TV
Mm.
shows over the
Yes,
years. And then you got to have to figure out, well, what's real here and what did they just make up?
exactly. Yeah, and I think it must be clear that, when we talk about all these events through history of the US history, anyways, and as well as UK history, but this is a global phenomena. Surely it must be happening in other countries. There must be other leading people in those countries which maybe have their secretive UFO programs or information, knowledge, maybe even crashed retrievals. And I think it might be that the fact that they're all kind of holding the cards but hiding them, so everybody's kind of who's got what technology now is I think a big question, isn't it? Now we're moving into
Yeah. Each nation wants to hold on and exploit that crash technology, and they don't want to share it, and they don't want to share it with the public, so they can continue to make advances. Who was it? Philip Corso wrote the
Mm.
book The Day After Roswell and talked about integrating that technology they found into various things, including night vision cameras and devices. And it's fascinating. I wish we had more proof, but Colonel Corso told his story, and I think he did work for Eisenhower, and he told his tale, and he passed away. I don't know if there was much more left to say, but God bless him. He did come forward, another whistleblower. He tried to tell you about visitation. We had the proof from Roswell, at least. I think he said also there were other crashes, and he didn't get into that. So
Mm.
this American government has held hearings, and they end up being mostly behind closed doors, and you're not going to talk about this, signed a secrecy oath, and they know certain things, and then it just gets kind of locked up and on to the next issue. They don't want to, expose it to the American people. But apparently, they had a number of people say, I worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and we have bodies there. We've seen the studies of these creatures, and we've got the crash disk technology at the metallurgical lab there. And it's not a fake. It's not just silly rumors. It really is happening. And so we've got these bits and pieces, and hopefully we'll get more than just, the crumbs. We'll get the whole meal someday.
Oh, can I just ask you? I mentioned about Philip Corso there, and he did detail, like you say, about this technology being rolled out almost through very carefully selected companies. Another guy, I don't know if you're familiar with him, I don't know what you think about his claims. I think it was Schulman, and forgive me for my ignorance and not remembering, but he spoke about the Roswell Project Handbook, and he said he'd come across this leaked information that had all this technology and where it had been siphoned off to, and he particularly concentrated on the Bell transistor. He was saying there was no natural progression from what came before to what came in, I think,
Yeah, yeah.
1962. It just kind of was a massive leap, and he used this as not proof, but almost as in like, this is what you want to be looking at. Have you heard of these kind of things, and what are your thoughts about that? That our modern
Uh,
world is essentially based on
yeah.
technology.
When Philip Corso came public and claimed that these companies were approached and we got them quietly that technology, asked them to look into it, to exploit it, to turn it into something, one by one of these companies denied it. Oh, it's just our genius inventors, our engineers, our technicians that did this quite naturally. But as you say, we suddenly made some leaps that seem most suspicious in these fields. And so it could well be the truth that it was based on smuggled alien high tech hardware that they got in there. And maybe some people didn't know the truth. They were just told, like, this was being developed at some place. You're not to talk about it. What can you make of this? And so they don't, maybe people still alive from those days don't know where it originally came from. There's so much pigeonholing and secrecy and subterfuge within government and without government and in the media. And some say the media is still largely controlled, it's corporate owned. And if your corporation has a TV show or a news broadcast that starts getting into this, they could be in trouble, have their FCC license pulled or something like that. So it's so difficult to get the word out.
Yeah, I mean, in more modern times, Paul, the we have had over the last few years the UAP hearings, and I think really the only really good thing that came from that it was more public knowledge. It was out on the news, basically saying the Pentagon are basically saying yes, these some of these are UFOs. We might not know what they are, but certainly, which meant that it wasn't so much of the elephant in the room discussion anymore. It was kind of okay, yeah, we can accept that, UFOs likely, exist. But do you think that it's ever going to lead to some form of disclosure, or do you think it's just we are just going to be, it's just by like if you go back to Project Blue Book, it was through public demand that we want some answers that they created this. To be honest with you, there wasn't really much to Blue Book. To be honest, there wasn't many
Yeah,
people, was there? It was a bit more like kind of just make it appease us, like appease the general
yeah.
public. Do you think that's really what's happening now? Just trying to appease people and not really
I think
getting
so.
anything?
Yeah, at least some of it. Someone who was involved with Blue Book, and I can't remember now, said the best cases were removed from the files and didn't make the final Blue Book report because, that revealed way too much. It might have been Hynek himself who said
Yes.
that. So, do I think we'll ever have government disclosure? I'd like to say so, but I'm still pretty skeptical. In the next few years, something may break for some reason. That's the rumor.
And there are
You
there are
shouldn't
still
believe.
people there are still
Yeah.
people out there, Paul, that say there's no way they could sit on a secret for this long.
Yeah,
Really?
they've done a
Yeah.
fair job. There's been leaks and stories and
Yeah.
documents that have been leaked that tell us the real truth. But an official government disclosure, boy, I don't know. I like Luis Elizondo. You're familiar with Hector,
Yes.
or
Yes.
yeah, Luis Elizondo. And yet he's got this. Someone produced a chart of all the times he says government disclosure is coming, UFO disclosure. It's right around the corner. It's like for the last 12 years he's been saying this, and
Yes.
nothing ever happens. And it
No,
makes you
it's a
wonder,
shame.
well, do you know really what you claim to know or not? It's just so frustrating in every way.
It really is.
Sometimes you just throw up your hands and you say, whatever,
Yeah.
man.
I know, yeah, and you have to do that. I mean, I notice you have two books. You created two books so far, and you're working on another one. Did you say, Paul?
Yeah, I'm working on an updated version of my Missouri 1941 UFO crash book that came out in 2016, but the publisher died and they folded the company. So that's no longer available. I got a new company and it should be out next year. And I've been working on piecing together what Ronald Reagan knew. And there's some interesting stuff there that I want a blockbuster face to face meeting with Reagan and aliens, just like Eisenhower. And apparently, I don't know. I don't think it happened. I'm not going to make anything up. I try to use
Yeah.
integrity, facts, only logical speculation, and I point out where it's a little conjecture. And I'm not going to just make up some dumb story that can be easily picked apart. And I appreciate other researchers and writers like Marcus Lowth, whose work I've admired for many years
Thank you.
online. That's the truth. When he asked me to be on this show, I said yes right away. And so more power to
Mhm.
Marcus and to Steve Mera, and we're going to
Yeah.
keep digging. It's fun, isn't it?
It really is. It never ends. It's
Yes,
always expanding, and it's quite obsessive. Paul, it does take over your life, doesn't it?
yeah,
But if we can just put a little dint in the whole era
yeah.
of ufology, would be pleased.
We'll
Yeah,
kick the sides in until it breaks in.
I mean, Paul, I like to thank you for those kind words, and I appreciate your work as well. I find it absolutely fascinating how you say how you really get in there as well. And you find these documents that, all right, they might not necessarily prove, but they put these people where they say or where we
They
say
were,
they were.
yes.
So I find it absolutely fascinating. One thing I'd like to ask you before we kind of try and wrap this up. At the Anomaly Project, me and Steve, we kind of both of the view somehow, we might not necessarily know how, but these things, whether it's UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, all of the aspects of the paranormal are somehow connected, one way or another. Now, if the government and the presidents have got an interest in UFOs, which they undoubtedly have, do you think they might have interest in other aspects of the paranormal, whether it be Bigfoot sightings, hauntings, or time slips? Do you think they might be looking at that? Because we know the CIA, for example, look at all kinds of stuff. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that, Paul?
I don't know a lot about it, but I keep hearing our government is digging into researchers and scientists into other dimensions, higher dimensional existence. And that may be a secret of space travel, wormholes, and taking a dimension and flitting across what should be a vast expanse in just seconds. And so that may be, someone suggested, maybe where your soul goes when you pass from the body and into another dimension or plane of existence that's promised in almost all religions, and creates spirits who once in a while show themselves. The very famous General Patton was a very stern military leader who was successful in defeating the Nazis in Europe. His daughters both said he appeared to them in ghost form, if you want to call it that, an apparition, at the same time, at the point of his death. They found out this was the time he died. Like, Daddy, what are you doing here? And his image, he was looking right at them and then disappeared. So, how do you explain that? They would bring only ridicule upon themselves for making up such a thing. And that's just one example. You've heard many ghost stories. I've never seen a ghost myself, but Lincoln's ghost has been cited repeatedly at the White House. I think even Reagan's daughter said they saw something of that nature. Winston Churchill said Lincoln appeared while he was taking a bath, and Churchill said, "Sir, you have the better of me," or something, but you can see I have nothing to hide. It's a funny story, but there may be some truth to it. So, it could be somewhat tied through dimensional existence. And I'd like to know more, but science was never my major in school, I can tell you that.
I
I
mean,
think all those are interesting, aren't they? I mean, I think, the most modern research now is looking towards the quantum mechanics and metaphysicality that some of the UFOs that have been reported don't seem to enter water. There's no splash, there's no wake, as if they're not physical. Might look to be physical, but they might not be at
Yeah,
times. And that really applies to the entities themselves. I mean, we talk about physical bodies at Roswell, but we also got stories where they seemingly can walk through, go through the ceiling, come through the walls, and literally pick a person up. So I mean, it's kind of, well, are they physical or not physical? And the only times we really hear about those sort of things is paranormal cases where apparitions are seen to walk through walls and then prodded you or pulled your hair, or And
Yeah.
you think this is, I think this is
It,
an area, it might be the area why we can't just drop this bombshell on people's laps. Maybe if it was as simple as, like Jacques Vallée said, if it was as simple as these entities are just traveling vast distances of space to come and visit us on planet Earth, then it might not be such a big issue to disclose that. However, if you're mounting of all these other things on top, we've got to really sort of change our aspects of the understanding of reality and physics and things, and that becomes a problematic thing because you start getting into religion then and saying, well, how long back does this phenomena go? Because if you go back thousands and thousands of years, this references these strange incidents and strange beings. So have they been around forever? So I can imagine it can be quite a complicated incident. So I can imagine that they might section things off and just say, well, let's look at the nuts and bolts side of this, because
yeah.
there clearly are nuts and bolts side of this, and we'll keep the other stuff later. Put it back, and we might bring that forward in years to go.
Yeah.
Let's see how we go.
Give it to us piecemeal, a little
Yeah.
bit at a time. Let's start here with a actual disc or a craft or something. You may have heard of Ross Coulthart, I think his name.
Yes. Yes.
He's the Australian researcher says he's been to Arizona and he's seen a kind of dimensional portal where there are craft arriving, and that he somehow has proof of this. And it reminds me of a story about a year and a half ago. The publisher of my Eisenhower book said she and one of the employees at Foundations Publishing went to Arizona and someone gave them some night vision goggles. And she said it was like the Los Angeles freeway system up there. They saw things you would not normally see
Hmm.
at night. And there were
Yeah.
ships, there were craft. And she says, I believe this Ross Coulthart because I've seen it myself. So it makes me want to go on vacation to Arizona to start with. But
Oh
I
yeah.
had to find
Yeah.
some night vision goggles. And if there's a portal, a dimensional rift or something that opens up there, that would be most interesting and entertaining. And that might be something to look into.
There is definite evidence. We even within our own studies, we've got evidence of those, the existence of them. I mean, NASA announced that they know, they didn't hold anything back by saying portals exist. But the professional name they refer to them is electron diffusion regions. But whereabouts are they, and how does the phenomena utilize them is the big question. Because sometimes, they look to be nuts and bolts, but then just seem disappear or fade out, of reality itself, and it becomes problematic as to trying to work out against our physics and our understanding. But now we might have come across a time. They've been sat on this stuff for now for probably almost 100 years now, and you think to yourself, well, now we must have some toys ourselves where they look like UFOs and people will call them UFOs. We must have the technologies now. I've seen some things in the skies, and I would say it's likely our special technologies as opposed to something extraterrestrial, maybe, or interdimensional. It's confusing times now. Maybe they're waiting for that time where it's a lot easier then to be able to fly anything they want, because anybody's only going to say it's a UFO at the end of the day. But back in the 1940s and 50s, of course, the 52 and the flying saucer era and stuff, they were a mass, they were everywhere. And I think we might have been triggered by the silly experiments that we were doing by exploding nuclear weapons up at high atmosphere. I mean, it's just tremendously stupid. But of course, it's certainly going to catch the eye of anybody in the neighborhood, certainly, because those signals from that will be passed out into space very, very far. But I think in today's terms, Paul, I think we're coming to times when we can't just always say, "Oh, look, it's a UFO," because sometimes now I think they've got things that might
Yeah.
actually look like them. To be honest,
Yeah, experimental craft from the government, drones. There's all kinds of stuff. Even a kid working a model airplane. To make things even more complicated is artificial intelligence creating phony photographs, phony
yeah,
film footage that looks real, and some of it looks pretty fake. Let's face it.
yeah, some of them are
You see
bad.
this on the internet, and this is gumming up the works even worse. That to what can I believe anymore? And it's true. CGI was bad enough. Now AI can really
Yeah,
fool a lot of people. You could have footage of the president having
Yes.
relations with like a farm animal if you wanted to and make it look real. And so it's just what's
That's
real and
why
what's not
that's why I
anymore.
like history. I like the history because I think the older the case, the more interesting because it's before the internet. It's
Right.
before the software that was generated to create
Yeah.
fake footage. It was before all the fancy cameras, which can be altered so easily now in digital format. You know, we're going back to a time when we might not have even had the technologies around to be able to shoot things around the sky in incredible speeds, or the funding, let alone anything else, or the whole thing about keeping the secret, because they say there's more money spent on keeping the secret than it is actually the programs now. And I think the older the case, I find more fascinating. But how many of them are out there that really do need re-examining? Because they really do need to be looked at with more modern eyes and more equipment now and what we know, and bring some of those old things out. And I think it's a great idea that some of these things might get to become TV shows, or because there isn't many of them. I mean, we had the Betty and Barney Hill, which made into a film, didn't we? We had Travis Walton, you know, Fire in the Sky sort of thing, but there isn't many in association to the military or the highest standards, or the presidential area, the White House, that sort of thing. I think those cases should come out because I think they're the ones which really are true history and mean a lot. Because, like I say, the normal average person on the street now wouldn't even know who these people are, and the fascinating things that they'd encountered in the history. I think it would be great to bring them out into film format. I'd love to see them.
What's even worse is there are people who deny that the world is round. They're the flat Earth system. Oh my God, you gotta be kidding.
Yeah. We'll
Uh,
never be touching on
one
that on the
advert,
Anomaly project.
yeah, one advertisement in America said people from around the world are coming to the flat Earth. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean around the
Yeah,
world? You know, coming to
absolutely.
the Flat Earth
Brilliant,
Society to
brilliant.
reveal that it's actually flat. And if you go the wrong way, I guess you could fall off into space. It's just mind-boggling what people believe now. And you didn't study science whatsoever, or look at photos of the Earth from the moon landing, or from space, from
Yep.
satellites, and oh my gosh.
I know. I think
Here's
some
what
people
we're up
just,
against.
it
Yeah,
is. I think some people just want to be different, to be honest with you.
yeah, or want
So,
attention, but there's some people who really believe
I
that,
know.
well, we're not a globe.
I
These
really
are
do
all a fake
think,
conspiracy.
I really think we are living in more complicated times for disclosure as opposed from, years ago. I think it would have been easier then. I think it's become more complicated now,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
so but I keep hoping. I keep hoping that maybe one day we'll get something which is, we
that's
can
right.
say an absolute, yes, they're here.
Yeah.
Shall
And
certainly
not
see.
have it be fake footage either.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Paul, it's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you. It really, really has. I know you mentioned that you're working on, like an updated edition to your Missouri book. Is there anything else in the pipeline? Anything else you want to promote? Basically, the floor's yours for the next minute or so.
Other than these two books right behind me are still for sale off of Amazon, the Eisenhower Encounter and the Nixon Gleason Encounter. You can find that online and get a copy. Buy 100 apiece. Paulie has to survive in this world, but they'll hopefully will be made into movies. I'm going to do whatever I can to help them. And the Reagan project I'm working on, and the revamping of the 1941 Missouri case. I think that's enough on my shoulders for now. I got a lot on my
Yeah.
plate. So I thank you for having me on, and I hope we get that disclosure someday. I'm not too optimistic, but
No.
who knows? We'll see what happens.
We shall see. Paul, you're more than welcome, and we'd love to have you back on down the line. Certainly when your Reagan books out, so we can really delve into some of that. But thank you ever so much, Paul. It's been an absolute
Yes.
pleasure.
Yeah.
And
Thank you, Paul.
thank you guys for joining us. Make sure that you subscribe to our channel, obviously. Make sure you check us out on social media and check out the Anomaly Project Podcast.com for updates, articles, and further information. Until next time, goodbye and take care.